What's up, Degenerate Nation? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. This is the Big 12 college football betting preview. I'm Stuckey, and joining me, as always, my BBOC co-host, Colin Wilson. We did have a launch episode, but this is really the official start of the 2024 college football season. We are back for an 8th year. I thought it was 7, and then I went back and counted. We were doing the Jen and Juice episodes back in 2017 ahead of that college football season. So this is year number 8. Feels good to be back. Excited to talk some Big 12 ball, wide open Big 12, which makes it a bit more exciting. Colin, how goes it? And are you excited to dive into all of these previews over the next couple of weeks?
No disrespect to Brett McMurphy, Mike Calabrese, Mike Ionella, everybody we share the microphone with at Action Network. This is the baby. I mean, this is what I live for. This is what I get up for. You and I chopping it up, completely tearing down the Vegas market and being able to find winners. I think was it 7 or 8 years ago? You and I recorded the very first one in Naples together with this little tiny snowball-sized microphone, and we named Jim Harbaugh Bodog Jim. That's where that originally came from. So it seems like ages ago. This is my happiest spot in my entire professional career. And after 3 weeks of travel, stuck Vegas, Dallas, Indianapolis, I'm home this morning. I feel like a Buc-ee's truck stop right now, which is perfect because we're talking about the Big 12.
Yep. It's good to be back, and shout out to everyone watching on YouTube on our newly launched BBOC channel. What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stuckey.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there. But let's get into the Big 12. It's a really exciting conference this year, and it's really the Big 16. There's 16 teams in the Big 12. The 4 corner schools were added: Utah, Arizona, the 4 corners of Utah, Arizona, Arizona State, and Colorado. A year after we added Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and UCF. So a lot of change in the Big 12. And of course, Texas and Oklahoma are no longer around. A lot of return in production, more than any other conference in the Big 12. So there's a lot of stability. Only 2 new head coaches at Arizona and Houston. But let's start at the top. And the way that I'm going to group this is I'm going to group the teams in specific categories. We're going to start with the first 2, the 2 favorites, who I group together as your developmental teams, right? In the new age of college football, with all of the movement in the transfer portal, Utah and Kansas State, they're known for just getting players in. They're not going to have the top recruiting classes. They're not going to have the top transfer classes, but they develop talent and, hold on to guys. And they're the 2 favorites in this conference. The big news is Utah with Cam Rising now back healthy. Utah just had horrendous injury luck last year. They're the favorites to win this conference. I think the best price you can find out there is plus 350. Kansas State, they're plus 380. They'll have a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback in Avery Johnson, who we saw last year. Really exciting player, especially with his legs. Can he take that next step with his arm will be the big question. But let's start with your beloved Utah Utes. Over 9.5 win total, juice to the over. mentioned their injury luck last year. It was horrible. I mean, look, Rising, Bernard, Kuthi, Pittman, they're all back and presumably healthy. If Rising can stay healthy, I do think that they are the deserved favorite in the Big 12. What say you on the Utes?
Absolutely believe in all of the hype that is surrounding Utah, because you have to ask yourself, does returning production, does transfer portal experience even matter with this team? We're coming off a season with a pig farmer at a quarterback, and Sione Vaki, the defensive back, was a lightning rod as a running back. Now you're getting Cam Rising back, 22 TDs to 7 INTs from 2022 season before the injury happened in the Rose Bowl. And you got to try to replace Jaquindon Jackson, who took off to Arkansas, just a bruising running back that had yards after contact. But Jalen Glover had 121 carries last year. Brant Kuthi is back. The biggest weapon for Rising is going to be at tight end. And then Dorian Singer comes in from USC, massive 2022. He was also at Arizona, hit 2022, 98 targets, 1,100 yards, 2.2 yards per route run. Just an explosive element that Utah really hasn't had. So I think the one area that I'm focusing on Utah is blindside tackle. Redshirt freshman Caleb Lomu. Keep an eye on him. He's got to protect Cam Rising off this injury. So that would make me a little nervous. And then, from the defensive side, it's just nasty. Morgan Scalley's nickel D is never going to change. The defensive line is the best in the Big 12, Junior Tafuna and Keanu Tanuvasa. And then you look at cornerback Zemiah Vaughn, 13 PBUs over the last 2 seasons, and he also defends the slot. The secondary is top 25 and on target allowed. If you're unfamiliar with that stat, does the offense, does the wide receiver, does the target get it cleanly? Utah's top 25. There is no free passes in the air when the Utah secondary is involved. I think one thing needs to be discussed here and now, and I'm glad we're leading off with this, because I just came from the Big Ten, and this thing was being thrown around, and I can't even believe it's being talked about. Roster load management. I'm like, what are we, the NBA now? And why it applies to Utah. And the theory is, I'm going to make my conference championship game. That's going to be my ticket to get into the college football playoff. Or I'm in this 5-way race to make it. I already know my playoff bid is sealed, and I could hurt my chances by going to the conference championship game. And I'm going to play a little load management and sit people. Now, why do I bring this up with Utah? They go to the bounce house in the last game of the season. And if Utah's got it wrapped up, say the Big 12 championship visit in Arlington, or maybe their playoff standing is about 6th, why are you coming to play UCF? So my favorite bet on these guys is to make the playoff. You could win the conference championship. You could lose respectfully in the conference championship. Or there could be a tiebreaker scenario like the Mountain West last year when they had 3 teams, could only take 2, and had to use a freaking Harris poll and the BCS poll to determine who goes. Utah, I think, is a much better bet, lower than what you said on the number. About plus 260 is still out there on Utah to make the playoff. But to me, that's better than taking a conference championship here.
Yeah, I don't see any value in taking them to win the conference championship. There's just not, look, the one thing that we're going to talk about after going through these top 2 teams is this conference is wide open, which means there's going to be a lot of games that are within a touchdown spread. It's going to come down to injury and turnover luck that'll swing a game or 2 that'll probably determine who goes to the Big 12 championship. I'm going to say, now I'll phrase this on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being completely floored and 1 not being shocked at all, on, right in the middle of a 5. So like, maybe semi-surprised, but not completely shocked. I would say 10 teams. If there's 10 teams that made the Big 12 championship, I'll list them. You tell me if you would be shocked if any of them make it. Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Arizona, West Virginia, Iowa State, Texas Tech, TCU, UCF.
2 of them I hate.
Who would you be floored if they made it?
TCU and probably Texas Tech. The rest are fair game. You're right. The rest are
8,
fair game.
You have 8. I wouldn't be completely shocked if TCU or Texas Tech made it. But that's how wide open this conference is. So I just have no interest in taking the favorites. For what it's worth, the other concern I do have for Utah, it's just because of what they lost, is in the secondary. However, I mean, they lost 2 first team all Pac-12 safeties, and they lost Broughton at one of their corner spots. But I'm a huge fan of Keenan Johnson, and they're going to move the other Johnson from nickel to free safety. You can almost always just trust Kyle and Scaley with the secondary at Utah. Like, it's just one of those things that you can trust that they'll figure it out. So they did lose a lot of talent there, and you mentioned it. They're going to be great in the trenches. As far as their schedule is concerned, it's pretty manageable. They get 3 of the worst on the road in Houston, Colorado, and Arizona State. We know about their great home field advantage. I mean, you get Arizona, TCU, Iowa State.
No Kansas State.
Yep, no Kansas State, and BYU at home. They get Baylor at home as well. That's actually a non-conference game. It was previously scheduled. And their other non-conference games, Utah State and Southern Utah. So, look, their 2 hardest games on their schedule by far, at Oklahoma State, and then you mentioned it, at UCF in the finale. But overall, it's, close to just a national average strength of schedule. It's pretty manageable, and I think it just comes down to Rising staying healthy. The rest of the roster is pretty rock solid. And what does Utah always do? Like, they exceed expectations. They squeeze the most out of what they have. That's what they've done perennially under Kyle Whittingham. But moving on to Kansas State, this is a team over 9.5 also, but they're juiced to the under. Mentioned, I think the best price out there is plus 380 on the Wildcats to win the Big 12. There is some change here. New quarterback Avery Johnson, who did see action last year. Does he have the throwing acumen and the accuracy to get through an entire schedule? We know he can run. We know he's super talented, but is he ready to take that next step? He'll also be under the guidance of a new offensive coordinator. You have their offensive line coach, Riley, who now will take over because Colin Klein has departed. They're getting to the stud in the backfield. I am a bit worried about the wide receiver room and the offensive line, which you haven't said in a while with Kansas State, but I do have some concerns there. The defense should be okay. I'm not in love with the defense. I like their safeties, but can they get enough pressure is something that I'm concerned about. And over the last 2 years, they're plus 23 in turnover margin. Is there some potential regression there?
Mm-hmm.
But as I mentioned, the offensive line, they lost 4 of their top 5 offensive linemen, their top 2 receivers, and a stud tight end in Ben Sinnott, who got drafted. What are your thoughts on the Wildcats? Do you have some of the same concerns I do? I mean, they're going to be a solid team. I'm not running to the window to bet them as, essentially the co-favorite to win the Big 12.
Yeah, believe it or not, the defense is the reason that the play that I made that is in our Big 12 preview over at Action Network, you guys could go check it out. It was because of the defense, and I have the same concerns as you. Now, I think it's great that Matt Wells comes in as co-offensive coordinator. He's been a great quarterback coach everywhere that he's been. Utah State specifically for Jordan Love in 2018, just massive numbers, and Jordan Love fell off a cliff in 2019. And so I think that's great for Avery Johnson. And then the backfield, DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards are going to run that Chris Kleiman 2-back set. I mean, just all kinds of counter and power and all over you. I think that's great. I mean, Dylan Edwards came home. Him and Avery Johnson were childhood friends from Mays and Derby. Those are little suburbs around Wichita. He was homesick. That had nothing to do with Colorado. So that from an offensive perspective right there, we're set at the backfield. We're set at the quarterback position. Lots of questions with wide receiver, but the offensive line returns less than 50% of snaps here. It's definitely got my attention.
And they lost their 2 best. I mean, Beebe was a stud,
Yep.
Leviston, but Beebe is a huge loss.
I think Beebe was like all Big 12 every single year he was at Kansas State. So it's a big loss. And, the secondary should be the best in the Big 12. That is extremely important in this conference when you have some pass-happy teams coming against you. Marcus Sigel, corner Jacob Parrish, they combined for 14 PBUs. They're both back. So I have the same concerns as you. And the win total I project at 9.3. They're in contention. I think they're completely overpriced for the conference. I give them a 9.2% chance to win the conference, which equals like plus 950, not plus 370. So there's no value there for me. I went to the game of the year market, and oh boy, is there a spot that's just ripe for the taking. They go to Boulder off of a bye week to face Deion Sanders, and the Buffaloes are going to have issues with their rush defense in the front seven once again. They have a couple good pass rushers. They do not have any run defenders whatsoever. Kansas State should have a field day with that. Now, conversely, what's the entire Colorado offense? It's Shadur's arm. We just mentioned Kansas State is projected to have the #1 secondary in the conference. That is really bad news. Plus, like I said, Kansas State is fresh. I project the game Kansas State -11 on the road at Boulder. I'm taking game of the year -6 against Colorado as my best bet on Kansas State.
Yeah, it's if you look at their schedule, I think it broke right for them in certain aspects. I mean, like if you look, they do only have 4 Big 12 home games. They also get Arizona at home, which is the non-conference game. There's 2 of those. We already talked about the other. But they get their road games in league play. BYU, Colorado off the bye, West Virginia, Houston, Iowa State. That's pretty favorable. They also avoid Utah, UCF, zone as non-conference, and the 2 toughest teams that they play, Oklahoma State and Kansas, will travel to Manhattan. So I think that the schedule worked out for Kansas State. Yeah, I project them right around 9. No interest in the future, and it's really I think that their ceiling. Well, I do have some concerns about their special teams. I'll mention a couple special teams because special teams, with how wide open and close these teams are, some of these games might be determined. We saw some Big 12 games last year, blocked kicks that ended up deciding those games. That could end up deciding who goes to the Big 12 championship and who doesn't. But Kansas State, their ceiling, I think, is going to come down to Avery Johnson. Does he stay healthy? And how good and consistent of a passer can he be? And does someone step up as that true #1 option at receiver? But I think we're on the same page here that there's just no real rush to get involved from a futures perspective to win this conference on either Kansas State or Utah. You would agree?
Completely agree.
All right, well, let's move on to the next group of teams. I'm going to label them the returning producers. That is Oklahoma State and Iowa State. If you look at any list of returning production, you're going to see these teams at the top. People calculate this different ways. And I have them both in the top 3 nationally. Let's start with Brett's beloved Oklahoma State Cowboys plus 850 to win the Big 12. I think the best price on their win total over 8 -130. They pretty much bring everybody back. I mean, their offensive line has 215 starts returning, 8 previous full-time starters. Alan Bowman is back for his 7th year at quarterback.
And a fantastic mustache. He's got the whole curly Q thing going on the end too this year.
Yeah, matching that with Gundy's looks is great. And then Ollie Gordon, obviously, back at running back, one of the best in the country. Their wide receiver room is loaded with experience with Presley and Owens. Don't forget about Stribling, too. He's back from injury.
Yep.
He should provide a boost.
Mm-hmm.
Their offense has a lot of potential. The defense is where things get a little murky. Last year, it was bad. Nardo now is thinking about this. He was running his 3-3-5. He's going to go with more 4-man looks. You should see Colin Oliver, who has some pass rushing prowess, play more D end this year, and they're going to switch up some of their looks. But look, they bring back a lot of talent. I love their linebackers. They're pretty strong up the middle, but there's still questions about this defense. And, you know, if you look last year, yes, they won 9 regular season games. But, and Gundy, look, just when in doubt, trust Gundy. Over the last 15 years, Oklahoma State's averaged 9.3 wins. But they definitely overperformed. You know, I think that what they probably should have won, like, they're probably like a 6 or 7 win team. just by the metrics. But, and this is kind of similar to Iowa State, because we group these two teams together because they bring a lot back. They're also very similar in that they had slow starts. Iowa State had that, all the turmoil with the gambling scandal, and they lost some games early, including one to Ohio. Then they found their quarterback, and they kind of took off from there. Oklahoma State was horrendous early on in the season. Losing to South Alabama, they were juggling quarterbacks. They weren't giving the ball to Gordon enough. They finally settled on Bowman and gave the ball to Gordon a ton, and they took off. So these two teams are very similar in more than one way. But Oklahoma State, I think, for them to reach their potential, because I'm still not fully sold on Bowman. Like, he's just okay. He's not gonna, go out there and dominate for a full season throwing the ball. You're gonna have to lean on Gordon. He has some good receivers. He's just got to cut back on the mistakes. But for this team to reach its ceiling, the defense has to get better. Do we trust Nardo with all this experience and, making some tweaks to get that defense to the level it needs to be? From a schedule perspective, only 4 Big 12 home games, but it's a pretty manageable schedule. Their last 7 games are against arguably the bottom 7 teams in the Big 12.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a tough first 5. Your Hogs, they get them at home. They have South Dakota State, which isn't an easy game.
No.
The class of the FCS to start. Then they're at Tulsa. It's kind of like a trappy game, because then they have Utah and at Kansas State in games 4 and 5. That's their season as far as college football playoff, Big 12, because then their final 7, as I said, arguably you could say the bottom 7 or 8 teams in the league. What are your thoughts on the Pokes?
Well, I mean, scheduling perspective, you don't want this consecutive games that I'm looking at on the schedule for your trench. Utah, Kansas State, West Virginia. Those are wars. Those are 3 straight weeks of wars. Now, listen, I could go on about stats and everything like I usually do, production. Ollie Gordon, 68 missed tackles, 3.7 yards after contact. But I think there's
no
2
starters in the portal, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah. I mean, they've got it going in Stillwater. But at the same time, I think there's 2 stories that I took from Las Vegas at Media Days that are actionable. And so I think I would rather tell 2 quick stories about Oklahoma State than I would talk about all of the stats that they have, because it completely matters. Now, last year we sat on this podcast and talked about how they're going to change run blocking schemes. Gundy told us they're going to go away from zone read. They're going to go into more manpower and counter. Well, if you notice, Oklahoma State was terrible to start the season. Why? Gundy flat out told me, he's like, my offense was still running zone read. I don't want zone read. I told them after we took consecutive losses to South Alabama and Iowa State, we went into the bye week and I told the team, that's it. Man, power, counter, no more zone read. Then the season just took off. Ollie Gordon became one of the biggest running backs in the nation. I asked him at Media Days, what do you think about yourself in the game? He says, I think they got it pretty good. I said, what did you run in your first play? He said, outside zone. I said, didn't coach tell you to stop running outside zone? And I got Ollie to laugh on a day that he was serving his punishment by talking to the media. I think the point of that is that Gundy clearly had to interject in the middle of the season to get the run schemes going. I think that applies to this season from the get-go. So those first couple games, again, I mean, South Dakota State, their whole entire offense migrates, picks up from a coaching perspective and goes to Northwestern, but it's not like they're going to stop. The Jacks are going to stop doing what they do. Arkansas, we'll get to there. I think their offensive line is going to have a field day with Nardo's defensive line. But the other story that we need to talk about, because props just hit the market, specifically pass, rush, receiving props. I took Alan Bowman aside. I had about a 20-minute conversation with him on the field at Allegiant. And we talked about everything from, he thinks his biggest game is Arkansas, not Utah. We talked about his how the knock on him at Texas Tech was the progression from his first to his second to his third wide receiver, and that his success rate takes a huge dip when he goes to second and third. And he's like, yes, that's absolutely true. I'm a hot read quarterback. I leaned on it way too much, but now I'm 7th year. I don't know how he got his waiver in Talia Tagovailoa didn't, but he's in his 7th year and he's getting better about that. But then he looks at me and he tells me specifically, The great thing is having Dazon Stribling healthy because he wasn't healthy last year. He didn't play much. Brennan Presley is going to get double teamed the entire season, and Dazon Stribling is my hot route. I will let the masses do what they want with that since props just hit the market on receiving yards for best in Big 12. So when I look at this team stuck, what does Gundy really care about? There is a narrative that he doesn't care about non-conference games, which is, I mean, there's just a history of problems in non-conference. Where Gundy kicks ass and takes names has always been on the conference schedule. Texas, Oklahoma, it doesn't matter. I mean, they're not there anymore. His best games are against that. Utah comes to Stillwater on September 21st. They're on back-to-back travel. The Pokes go to Kansas State after that. We mentioned that's tough. West Virginia is tough. I project the win total at 9.1, but where you need to bet is within the conference. They're going to be a TD favorite over Baylor, BYU, Colorado, Arizona State, Texas Tech, and yeah, West Virginia. There are shops, multiple shops out there that have conference win totals. I project them at 6.2 conference wins. Number out there is 5.5 at plus money. It shouldn't be. Gundy cares most about that conference schedule. He's a heavy favorite in a ton of them. Over 5.5 Big 12 wins for me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they just true to form dropped one of those games, like South Dakota State, Arkansas, or Tulsa.
Yeah.
And you know, they've had many games like that in the past. I will also mention my second special teams mention. Logan Ward, I think, is their new kicker because they lost Hale. It was pretty reliable. That's something certainly worth watching. But key to this team, they have a ton of experience, but the defense just needs to take that next step. A lot of it's going to come down to, can they generate more pressure? Can the more four-man fronts lead to more pressure? Because that, I think, will take some of the pressure off of the back end of the defense. So that's certainly something to watch. But let's move on to the Cyclones of Iowa State. They are 11-1. I think it's the best you can find out there to win the Big 12. Over 7.5, minus 105. Last year they finished 7-5 and lost the bowl game. We talked about how they started off pretty poorly and then really found their form as the season progressed. Rocco Becht and their new offensive coordinator last year, who's lost to the NFL, they really unlocked the explosiveness of this offense, and their offense took a really big jump last year. New offensive coordinator now. You know, apparently it's going to be a lot of the same in-house hire, a lot of the same schemes and concepts. We'll see if there's any step back from a play calling perspective. But this team was super young last year. So if you want to make a bullish case for Iowa State, they were one of the youngest teams in FBS last year. They played the most freshmen of any Power 5 team. Look at Becht. Look at Sama, their running back, who showed a lot of promise down the stretch. Even their tight end, Brahman, who I think is going to be a really good player.
Monster.
Excuse me, Brahmer. So I think what this team comes down to is two things. Because I think the defense is going to be fine. They do lose TJ Tampa. So their second cornerback spot, I love Tampa. He was an absolute stud, is sort of a question. But they bring back a ton on defense. And one thing you know about this defense is it's really always going to be pretty solid, but especially when they have really good safeties, that's where everything starts from with this 3-3-5, and they have really good safeties this year. Mm-hmm. So I think the defense will be fine. They need to find a way to just generate more pressure, which was a weak spot last year. But I think this comes down to the offensive line for Iowa State. Really, it struggled last year, but now much more experienced, 90 career starts. And what is going on in the one-score games with Matt Campbell? 3-13 over his last 16 one-score games. 1-6 in games decided by 4 or less in the past 3 years. Can they, and what did we just talk about in the Big 12? There's going to be a handful of close games with how close, the top 7, 8, 9 teams are. Is there regression there? Is it partly on Campbell for why they're not winning some of these games? But you would think with all of the experience that's coming back, and it was young experience,
True freshman, not
This-
redshirt. Yeah.
Yeah, that this team can take the next step. That offensive line, which is a struggle, all 5 starters are back. What are your thoughts on Iowa State? And are you bullish or bearish?
I've been in the oven warming up on this team, and I'm going to need you to stick a thermometer in me and check my temperature because I am absolutely 100% in love with Iowa State. So Taylor Mauser was the former tight end coach, and if Matt Campbell's going to promote from within, it's going to be his tight end coach is now the offensive line coach. I stood up. I said, Matt Campbell, it's good to see you. A 3rd year in a row. Usually I ask you about your tight ends, but where in the hell did this Rocco Beck explosiveness come from? Iowa State finished top 15 in rush and pass EPA. You go back to the Brock Purdy years with all the weapons that they had, they did not finish this high in EPA. I don't think they ever cracked the top 50 because Iowa State's a success rate offense. They're a 12, 13, multiple tight ends, move the chains, which is great for Benjamin Brahmer. He listed 6'7". I was told the listing of his weight and height doesn't do him any justice for how big this kid actually is. 26 catches as a freshman, 16 of them for first downs. That is the key to the success rate. But the explosiveness, holy cow, I've never seen this on an Iowa State offense. Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, both average over 2.6 yards per route run. I've never seen this on the outside or in the slot for Iowa State. When
Now
I
you got
asked Matt,
Alston from Army, who I think is really intriguing.
Yeah.
Too.
I asked Campbell on the side, I said, how in the world did the Hunter Deckers scandal turn into Rocco Beck being the most explosive quarterback in the conference? He said it caught all of us on the coaching staff surprise. And the only thing I can say is that his high school tape was matched up thread for thread with Brock Purdy. That's the only thing we knew about him coming in. He said he comes from a great family, great kid. The leadership in the locker room is unmatched. And that was from a true freshman 18-year-old last year. Safe to say, I am heavily in love with an Iowa State team that has never won more than 9 games in their entire program history since 1895. Yes, I'm backing them. From a defensive perspective, 9th and on target allowed. That goes back to the safeties that you talked about, right? You can't get a ball into the numbers when you're passing against Iowa State. I think the good thing for the 3-3-5 stack that's called by John Heacock is that there's a lot of depth at nose. There's a lot of depth at defensive end, and they're going to keep generating havoc with a 3-man front, which allows you to drop and play any kind of coverage you want, which is what they always do. They do not fall for motion. They do not fall for gimmicky offenses. When you look at the schedule, they dodge Oklahoma State in league play. They're a TD favorite in 5 conference games, a coin flip against West Virginia. Kansas is an Arrowhead. That's not a road game to me. That's a 3-hour trip on I-35 for Iowa State fans who, by the way, do you remember when they filled up
Probably
Allegiant
have more
against,
Iowa State fans there.
they filled up the entire stadium at Allegiant against UNLV a few years ago. So you can't tell me they ain't going to fill Arrowhead up. So the Utah Salt Lake City is definitely the toughest game. Absolutely should probably be chalked up as a loss. What a defensive under that's going to be. This team ended with wins over Kansas and Texas at the end of last season, and they were a possession short of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. That's how high they were peaking. One of the highest experience marks in the nation. Beck's explosiveness is better than anything that's ever been on this Iowa State roster. My best bet from the article that we put out on Big 12 Preview was Iowa State to make the Big 12 championship. That number was listed at multiple books at plus 475. We can't put it in the app. We don't have the option, the availability to put something like that in the app. I absolutely love and endorse anything over 10-1. I give Iowa State a 9.9% chance to win this conference. That comes to plus 910. That is your stopping ground for Iowa State. Anything above that, I fully endorse as a Matt Campbell backer here. We're going to get to 10 wins, baby.
I agree. I'm on my Iowa State. There, I think where you have to look for a future in this conference, because it's so wide open. Like, I think you take, as we talked about, you take Utah, you take Kansas State, you throw them out.
Yep.
There's just no value there. Oklahoma State at, as the 3rd favorite, I can't get there from a price perspective. So then I think that you look at that next tier, right? Before you get to like Colorado, Baylor, Cincy, Arizona State, BYU, Houston, you can make cases for any of these teams.
Yeah.
And, if some people will be high on some, others will be high on others. Iowa State made the final cut for me. And yeah, there's an 11-1 out there. And I think at Yeah, there's an 11-1 still out there. Yep.
And be
I agree.
mindful
I'm on
of
board.
be mindful of playoff odd numbers, right? Because if you win the Big 12, you have an automatic entry into the quarterfinals. So if you're sitting around staring at a 10-1 on Iowa State and you see an 11 or 12-1 to make the playoff, it's the exact same bet.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is like not fully sold on the kicking game, but which could matter in close games.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it. They have only four Big 12 home games, but Kansas, basically a neutral game. And hold on, let me pull up their schedule.
Yeah, let me say this about the luck of the one possession games, right? 3-13. We are now entering Mike New Ball State territory where I believe he was 1-16 over a span of 3 years. And I think even you and I podcasted said this has got to turn around at some point. I think the fourth year of Mike New, we finally got one possession wins on the schedule. So when's it going to turn around? Matt Campbell, he'll get it figured out or not ever take another job anywhere else again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, actually, yeah, I'm sorry. They have 5 Big 12 home games plus the Kansas game,
Yes.
which is neutral. So at Utah's obviously tough. At West Virginia won't be easy. Their first is at Houston. But I think it's, all things considered, it's a pretty manageable schedule. And I went back and watched some of these close games. I don't think it was some, horrendous coaching by Campbell or some coaches I do believe are just really bad.
James Franklin.
Clock management, Mario Cristobal, some of the decisions late that'll cost them games. I don't think that's the case with Campbell. So there definitely could be some positive regression coming there. But I think all these freshmen are going to take the next step, and they can just, find a pass rush, and that offensive line with all of the continuity can take a step forward. What I saw from Sama at the end of last year, Iowa State is definitely scary. I endorse that future as well. But let's move on to
Sama. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, Sama's like 150-1 to lead the Big 12 in rushing. So just drop that out there for everybody.
All right, let's move on to let's go with a trio of teams that are in the mid-tier, and we'll start with let's start with Arizona. My beloved Arizona Wildcats from last year. I backed them incessantly. They were an against the spread wagon. I love Jedfish. Fafita was tremendous for me. As soon as he took over a quarterback, didn't turn the ball over, really smart with the ball. They're 14-1 to win the Big 12. Over under 7.5. But they have a new staff. Brennan comes over from San Jose State. They have a new offensive coordinator, Dino Babers. So going from, pretty pure pro style, maybe to more spread concepts, and a new DC. Internal hire, was an assistant, so it should be a lot of the same principles. I am very sorry that I have to admit this, but to all of my Arizona fans who were just in my DMs all year, I'm not as high on the Wildcats this year. I actually like the under on their win total. Look, McMillan is awesome, but he even had a procedure that he just had. We'll see if he's fully healthy. He's one of the best wide receivers in the country. But I think it's the staff change is huge. I cannot underestimate. I was, watched Arizona and so intently because I was always betting them. Jedfish and that staff put Fafita in just unbelievable positions, and their scheme was incredible. But now with McMillan, even if he is healthy, I don't think that their other weapons are as good. Losing Cowling, losing their stud tight end, McLaughlin, I think is going to have an impact on the offense. And then they lost their best offensive lineman by far. So, their left tackle replacing Morgan, that's not going to be easy. We saw in the bowl game the drop-off once Morgan was not out there. And then the defense. Look, the defense was great last year. It was one of the most improved units in college football. But the year before was one of the worst. I think there could be some regression there. Defensive line, huge turnover. I'm getting similar vibes to like, it's not a complete parallel, but like Khalil Tate, who had that huge year, and then someone came in. There was all those high expectations, and then they went 5-7. So some similarities to 2018 Arizona. The depth, especially at quarterback and offensive line, is very questionable. And they have, if you look at their schedule, at Kansas State is a non-conference game. So that's good and bad in some sense. They should start 2-0 against New Mexico and Northern Arizona. And they have some tough road games in league play. At Utah, at BYU, who's off a bye. That's not going to be easy, even though BYU was, not some juggernaut this year. At UCF, at TCU. So, there's obviously some winnable games here on the schedule. To get Colorado, Houston, Arizona State, Texas Tech at home. But I project them slightly under 7 wins. I think that they take a step back this year. What are your thoughts on the Wildcats?
The road schedule's not easy. You're going to go to Utah. You're going to go to Bounce House. You're going to go to TCU, who's off of a bye week, and you're right before the Territorial Cup. And then, oh yeah, by the way, I know BYU is not supposed to be pretty good, but you're going to go travel to face them. They're going to be off of a bye playing in one of the highest elevations in college football. So the road schedule is unkind, but I think there needs to be 2 conversations about this team. One, Brent Brennan is not a guy that turns programs around immediately. At San Jose State, he had a year 0 situation, but he started 3-22. In 2020, the light switch flipped on, 7-1. There was a victory in 2019 over Chad Morris in Arkansas when they went on the road to Fayetteville. So Brent Brennan can coach. He's always been able to coach in game. But 3-22, his first few seasons at San Jose State, that tells me that he's not going to be able to pick up what Jedd Fisch left behind and immediately transform it into something bigger. Houston is a different story. Willie Fritz has that history. Brent Brennan does not. Now, Dino Babers, hey, I'm not going to completely pull these guys off of their pro style offense and put them in my spread, is what he said. But what I have heard is that we're not going to run any play action pass, which was the biggest thing for Noah Fifita last year. It was a huge weapon for him. And Dino doesn't
Basically
run play.
Given free wide open passes plenty of times.
Right. And I think the argument, you and I, we battled on Noah Fifita a lot last year. And I think I'll still stick firm in my stance that he has 25 touchdowns, but he only has 9 big time throws. That tells me his weapons did all the work. Now, he didn't make mistakes. You're right. Doesn't make mistakes. You can trust him. We can bet on him. But his targets did all the work when you look at that TD to big time throw ratio. So the defense, it's hilarious that Dwayne Akina is a defensive coordinator. This guy started his career in 1982 at Hawaii. He was the offensive coordinator at Arizona, offensive coordinator in 1995. So that tells you near 30 years later, he's the defensive coordinator. So he's been there for 15 years. No changes really going on here. The defensive line rotation got completely wiped. It's now populated by Syracuse and San Jose State transfers. That's probably not going to work, but what is going to work is Takario Davis had 15 forced incompletions last year, which was the 9th highest individually of all FBS safeties and corners for PFF. But the schedule is pretty easy when you look at what's happening at home. Arizona projects to be a favorite, at least a small favorite, and close, and 9, maybe 10 games, depending on what power rating you're using. The win total sits at 8. So that tells you being favorites in 10 games, but only a win total of 8 tells you how close the schedule is going to be in a lot of these games. But Kansas State doesn't count towards the conference standings. That was scheduled before. BYU, Houston, TCU, it's a great draw. I don't have any money down in Arizona, but my conference win total falls at 6. Their conference win total on the market is 5.5. If you're going to bet Arizona, I like the conference win total to go over because, Kansas State's a non-con. That's not going to win. So I'll avoid the full win total. But then again, I'm not backing an offense. You and I are smart about our money. We're going to invest in an offense. It's going to change from pro style to spread when play action was the biggest weapon for Fifita. Not going to touch these guys, but if you do, I like the conference win total over.
Yeah, no, I like the under. I just think the staff, it's a big downgrade from what they had last year.
Agreed.
And I think there's more holes on the roster, and you could see some defensive regression. So, travel's tougher as well. So yeah, I'm going to be on the under, sadly. I'm sorry. To all of my Arizona fans and friends, it was a hell of a ride last year that I'll never forget. But let's move on to West Virginia, who also had a pretty magical ride. They finished 8-4 after Neil Brown was written off by many, and then they won their bowl game to get to 9 wins. There is some stability here. I think they're top 30 in returning production overall, although the defense has to replace a lot. Brought in a lot of transfers on the back end to fix their pass defense issues. That's going to be a key to their season. Do some of these transfers on the back end hit and improve their pass D? Garrett Green back at quarterback with some really good running backs in White and Donaldson. You know that this running game is going to be there. And look, they kind of leaned into Green's strengths, right? He can run the ball. He would take some shots deep, mixed in once the defense was coming up. He does need to improve like the intermediary passing game. And I think that's like, if you want to buy the bullish case for West Virginia, it's that Green takes the next step. Like, all right, now everyone saw what West Virginia did. It's like, we want to pound you into the ground and then take some deep shots where he was effective. But in that intermediary range, can he take the next step and develop? Because he does get 6 of his top 7 wide receivers back. You had Bray from Oklahoma State. So the offense, I've read a lot about people are like, oh, the offensive line is going to be fine. It's one of the best. Last year it was one of the best. I don't know if I think they're going to take a slight step back. I mean, when you lose Frazier, who's one of the best centers in college football to the NFL, and then your stud right tackle and Nestor, I think, it's probably still its top 25, 30 offensive line, but I don't know if it's where it was last year. And last year, their defense had holes, and they were extremely lucky with injuries. They just had everyone play. All their key players just didn't miss time. And they lost 3 starters to the NFL and 3 starters to the portal. And if you look at who they brought in to replace those guys, it's just not up to par from a talent perspective. Additionally, they have the hardest Big 12 schedule, a top 10 strength of schedule overall. Like, look at their schedule. The only game where you're like, I know that West Virginia is going to win this game is Albany, right? Look at West Virginia's schedule. Do you have another game on there
Yes.
where you're like, I know that they're going to win that game?
It's my best bet. So,
Which game?
It's game of the year against Pittsburgh.
Okay, but it's at Pittsburgh in the backyard brawl. That's not like a game where you're like, all right, they're definitely going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you were talking about that as at Pittsburgh in a rivalry game is one of their, like, it is a brutal schedule. They do get 5 Big 12 home games, but they draw Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Arizona, Iowa State. They only avoid Utah from the top. They also face like 3 straight teams off the bye late season. And, some of these games, like where this doesn't work out for them, at Cincy, at Arizona, at Texas Tech, like those are teams you'd probably rather have at home. And, you're hosting Kansas State, Kansas. It's a really, really tough schedule. But it's going to come down to can Green progress the passer, and then, can their defensive backs, can the transfers hit? Losing Bishop is a big loss. You need some Northwestern transfers to really hit here. But when and actually I should say they lost 6 defenders to Power 4 teams. 3 of them were starters. So like there was a lot of talent, and 3 to the NFL that left this defense. And you got to remember, this is a team that was picked last in the Big 12 last year.
Yep.
And then they jumped up, won 9 games. Probably should have been 6-6, right? If you like. They went 3-1 in 1 possession games. They beat TCU by 3 because of 2 blocked field goals. They had a goal line stand to beat Texas Tech. They had a last-second touchdown to beat Baylor. Even games against Pitt and UCF, which weren't 1 possession, those were like dead even statistically. And, Jerkovich and Plumlee just turned the ball over a ton. Mm-hmm. They did lose on a Hail Mary versus Houston, but they also had like a miraculous play to take the lead late. So, you could argue they won like 5 of the 6 coin flip games last year and should have been like 6-6. So 20-1 to win the Big 12, total 6.5, 7. I kind of like the under here. I think that the hype has gone a little too far. Everyone was selling West Virginia last year. Yes, they definitely exceeded expectations, but they were definitely fortunate as well. What are your thoughts on the ears?
Well, I mean, one note on the scheduling that you went through, the November schedule, there's an aspect of it that people need to realize. Cincinnati, Baylor, UCF are all off a bye week. That is a brutal thing in the month of November. I don't really pay much attention to September and October buys, but when you're getting fresh legs in the month of November or around Thanksgiving weekend, it's a really big deal. 3 buys by your opponents, that's bad news. Now, listen, everybody knows I ran with the flag on this team last year. 4.5 win total, hit it, hit it, hit it, hit it. I couldn't stop hitting this team because they had an identity on offense, and Neil Brown was going to start calling the plays. So congrats on what they did. And we can say they're a 6-win team, a 9-win team, and how great they were. But Neil Brown got up on the podium in Vegas and said, we're not going to be in the top 25. And I don't know why nobody's talking about us. And that gives us motivation again. So we'll see how much that motivation is. But really, it's all about that rush offense. You mentioned Frazier and Nestor gone, 2 huge pieces. Now, from an experience perspective, their offensive line got a major boost in snaps because of Xavier Bosley that came in from Jacksonville State, 6'5", 315. He's got the body. He's got the grades. But what was that schedule for the Gamecocks last year? So we'll see. It's different than Zach Frazier and Doug Nestor. So we'll see if he can help out here. A heavy 63% rush rate. It's going to be 12 personnel every 3 or 4 snaps, and they're just going to come right at you. And Jaden Bray comes in from Oklahoma State, and that pumps the wide receiver to returning yards up to 90%. So there's a lot of things I like about the offense. The identity, it's going to take advantage of certain teams. They can lean on it, and they got to find answers right away against the Penn State defense. Now, the back end of the West Virginia defense is what really kept me from dreaming that this isn't over. They're one of the 8 teams that really has a legitimate shot to win this. 2 portal players at corner, lots of injuries at linebacker last year. So they're going to have a lot of older players at linebacker, but they didn't play because of injury in the 3-3-5. Aiden Garnes transfers in. He defended the slot really well. He had 8 PBUs on 40 targets, but it was at Duquesne. How much do we take in their strength of schedule? But the defensive line is the strong point. So we'll see what they can do. Gardner Webb transfer comes in. He had 107 pressures, but again, it's Gardner Webb, right? Ty French comes in there. So we'll see what they could do. Now, my best bet for West Virginia, because my win total is at 6.5. And while the number, I think, is where it should be, I give them 6.2% chance to win the conference. So the odds on the conference are fine. I'm not going to touch that either. I think the X's and O's against Pitt stuck out to me hardcore. And the reason is because I project the game at 11 and the number is 4.5 in the market. Pitt and Narduzzi is going to potentially put in the worst front 7 they have ever had for Narduzzi. It is projected to be bottom 3 in the ACC, and that is saying something in a conference of 17 teams. They lose a trio of experience on the defensive line. They project to be in the bottom half of the ACC, which is very uncharacteristic, and West Virginia is going to line up and run it straight down their throat. I like West Virginia minus 4.5. I make it 11. SP Plus, I think, makes it 11.7. I'm just looking at multiple power ratings. The number's wrong. I know it's backyard and it's always close, but there's a major mismatch in the Pitt defensive line versus West Virginia's rush offense.
All right, let's head to Kansas. Really intriguing team this year for a multitude of reasons, including the fact that they won't play home games on campus. They're going to play their conference home games in Arrowhead, and they're going to play their non-conference home games in like a MLS stadium.
Children's Mercy Park, yeah.
You definitely have to, it's definitely worth, to me, at least a half point. And I think depending on who they play, it could be a little bit more. So that certainly plays a role here. The offense should still be really good, assuming Jalen Daniels can stay healthy. He comes back. You have Devin Neal at running back. You have skill position talent all over. The offensive line did lose 2 to the NFL. Brought in a couple transfers who I like, who might be able to fill those spots at center and left tackle. Not really worried about the offense, although I do think that just from a play calling perspective, losing Kotelnicki at offensive coordinator, it's going to hurt. I think he's one of the best play callers in the country. They bring in Jeff Grimes. Some similarities there with like the motion, the wide zone. So they have philosophically, it's not a huge difference. They bring in Grimes as the co-offensive coordinator, but I think there's definitely going to be at least a drop off. The main question is the offense still should be really good. Just can Daniel stay healthy? Because there's no more Jason Bean. If he doesn't, then it gets pretty grim. Grim is also one of their receivers. No pun intended. But this comes down to their defense. You can, I think, rely on their secondary with Bryant and Dotson at corner, one of the better corner duos in the Big 12. But it's a rebuilt front seven. I think they're going to struggle against the run again, undersized overall. What are your thoughts on it? Is a senior laden team. You have a quarterback with a ton of potential. I think they might have they could have like 14 or 15 senior starters. And just from a scheduling perspective, they do avoid UCF, Oklahoma State, Utah, Arizona, which is a good thing. They do go to K-State and host Iowa State. So overall, it's a pretty manageable schedule with 5 Big 12 home games in quotes, but put an asterisk there because they're not true home games. But if you look at just isolate the Big 12 schedule, right? They start Lindenwood at Illinois, UNLV. And then of their 9 Big 12 games, they face 7 of the bottom 8 teams. So it's a pretty manageable schedule, but it comes down to Daniel's health. How much do you think the drop-off is without Kotelnicki? And then this defense, the ceiling probably just isn't that high because it's hard to see this defense really holding up all season. What are your thoughts here?
I laid an early season, I think March, April-ish. I took over 8 at some pretty good juice because my win total came to 9 with an amazing amount of returning from a TARP perspective, from transfer and returning experience on the defense. They came up to about 90%. Offense, very mid FBS at 60%. But because my projections were over and I thought it would steam, which I did a little bit on the juice, I was like, better get in on this 8. I got to media day in Las Vegas, and I immediately started regretting the bet that I made on the Kansas Jayhawks. There are a number of things that are just flashing red flags everywhere. First off, yeah, Grimes is coming in for Kotelnicki, and you're right. There's pre-snap motion. There's some other things going, but he is much more heavy usage and power run between the tackles. And another thing is the tempo. I think if you're looking for week 1 totals or totals in the future market, there's going to be an up tempo here. Kotelnicki was really slow. I mean, they were, I think 30 seconds per play. They weren't high whatsoever. And then you look at Grimes.
Well, they play Lindenwood week 1. I'm not sure on the tempo of Lindenwood. I have to be honest.
Yeah. Kansas last year, 112th in tempo at 29.5 seconds. Grimes at Baylor was 26.6. He was 59. So there's going to be and Lance Leipold has mentioned, we want to be more tempo. So look for totals to maybe get even bigger into Kansas. But the regret immediately came with 2 factors. One, Jalen Daniels was asked about his health on the side. Lance Leipold's direct response, he's okay. Now, I'm listening to Cam Rising is great. I'm listening to all these quarterbacks in college football, clean bill of health, even though they didn't play in spring. You get to Lance Leipold, and what do I hear? He's okay. That makes me extremely nervous with Jason Bean in the NFL. The other thing that makes me extremely nervous, coach, you're going to be playing your home games in Arrowhead. Is there anything about wind, stadium, preparation to drive, anything that really sticks out about what it's going to be for Kansas football? His answer, we're going to have to practice a lot more on grass. You go and look, practice facility at Kansas, there's not a lot of grass to practice on. That makes me extremely nervous for these home conference games. I regret that over 8 completely. I think I'm going to stick to my win total, say it goes over 9, could push at 8. I'm going to look for ways to get out of it this season. I think the best bet, and you already mentioned it, what's the weakness of this team? The defensive line. They're not going to be able to defend the rush. What's one team that we know is going to be able to plow over them with the rush because they do it every single year? That's Kansas State. Kansas State is -6.5 in the market in the Sunflower Showdown. What is that game usually? Because Kleiman has this, you go down Kansas State's schedule. When they're beating somebody, He beats the living shit out of teams by 30 and 40 points, and this game is especially no exception. So give me the Wildcats under a touchdown game of the year, -6.5 against Kansas.
Yeah, that's that. I looked at that as well. It's like, all right, what teams would you be worried about from a rushing perspective? Illinois, right? Like going to Illinois, you know what Illinois is going to try to do.
Yep.
Arizona State, you know what they're probably going to try to do. Scatterville. West Virginia,
Oh yeah.
you know what they're going to try to do.
Houston with the
So
triple. Houston with Donovan Smith in the triple in space that he runs from Tulane.
yeah. So there's some teams that definitely can take advantage of that weakness on Kansas. I'm close to market, but if I had to bet it, I'd probably go under, but more on gut because my number is pretty close.
But you can't project Jalen Daniels' health. 18 games in the last 3 years. That's an average of 6. Where I mean, you're sunk. We are sunk. You and I. How many times are you and I sitting around on Saturday morning, desperately texting and checking Twitter for people that are actually at the field in Lawrence, looking to see if Jalen Daniels is even taking a snap, and we can't even get any clear information out of our channels that we have into Lawrence. So I'm right now regretting the 8 that I put in, but we're gonna roll.
All right, let's move on to another trio of teams. I'm going to call these guys let's call them the transfer. I can't think of a word that starts with a T that I want to use here. The transfer reliance. UCF, Texas Tech, Colorado. I think for them to hit their full potential, these are teams that, at least on one side of the ball, sometimes both, they're going to need transfers to hit. Let's start with your beloved UCF Knights, plus 950 to win the Big 12, over 7.5, minus 105, I think is the best out there. I think the key to this team, right, on both sides, well, you bring in KJ Jefferson to be the quarterback, and I think that he's probably a better version of Plumlee. He's not as fast, but he's just a better passer when he's healthy. But he can also run that Gus Malzahn offense. So how much of an upgrade is he? And the defense, so that's a big transfer that comes in, I think is a positive. The defense is more of an unknown. They bring in 7 Power 5 transfers on that defense. They also bring in defensive coordinator Ted Roof. I don't love the hire, but his specialty is run D, which is one of the things that UCF really needed to fix and address. They were just horrific trying to defend the run last year, so they really could use a bump there. And they had, look, if you look at the teams, UCF, BYU, Cincy, Houston, that made the transition before last year, UCF by far made the smoothest transition, and they're now in the mix. BYU, Cincy, Houston still, I don't think, are ready, and are still trying to figure it out. Look no further than the recruiting and the transfer classes that Malzahn brought in, both top 25. So, and if you look, you might say, oh, they went 6-6 last year, then lost a bowl to go to 6-7. They lost all of their coin flips. They lost 3 games by a combined 4 points. They blew that. I don't know how they blew that lead to Baylor. They had a 2-point conversion against Oklahoma. They had the block extra point against Texas Tech. This team easily could have won 9 games last year. So that 6-6 regular season record, a bit misleading. So I think what this comes down to is their transfer heavy defense. Can they see some improvements there? If they can, they're definitely a viable sleeper in the Big 12. If you look at their schedule, they get 5 Big 12 home games. That's important because they're 39-5 over the past 7 years at home. They do host Utah in the finale. That could potentially be very meaningful in the Big 12 race. They do have some tricky road games, at TCU early, won't be easy. At Florida, who's off of a bye. At Iowa State.
Cincinnati's a terrible spot.
Yep, Cincinnati, little sandwich spot there. You head out west to face Arizona State. But overall, it's not an overly imposing schedule because you avoid Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and you face 6 of the bottom 8 teams. And you get to face Utah at home in the bounce house. What are your thoughts on your beloved Knights? What is this team's ceiling?
Well, I think I'll work my way backwards from schedule to defense to offense because we'll talk about ceiling here. I mean, from a scheduling perspective, look, Florida comes off a bye. UCF is going to go to Gainesville. This is a game that has been much wanted in the state of Florida. These are two teams that are going in opposite directions as far as recruiting, as far as transfer portal, as far as coaches go. It's amazing what UCF has been able to do in the state of Florida with 1/10 of the resources of what Miami has. I would say in 5 years, you're not going to see much of a difference. It's not going to be, oh, UCF, the group of 5 team. They're going to be just up there with the rest of them, especially since their admissions are easier than any other college in the state. So, from a scheduling perspective, I talked about the Utah load management. That could be a factor there at the end. The Cincy comes off of a bye to face UCF off that game with the Gators. What a tremendous spot. So that's something they're going to have to get over. From a win total perspective, I actually made this 6.9. So you would think this isn't a team that you would pay attention to actually do any damage in the conference. But UCF has something going on defense that not a lot of other teams have. They have a ton of defensive interior talent. Ricky Barber and Lee Hunter are back on the defensive line. Barber had 39 pressures in 2022. Hunter had 41 stops last year. That is tremendous from the defensive interior. The rest of the college football world hit the transfer portal dying for defensive interior help. UCF already has it. Now, you're right about Ted Roof. That OU missed tackle number last year was so bad. He is good at the run defense, but he had to really wrangle OU's defense not till the second half of the season when he finally got the tackling to go in. So we'll see how he does there. When, in limiting air explosives is, and creating pressure is a forte of UCF. Don't let anything get behind you. Try to get pressure on the quarterback with 3 or 4. We'll see if Roof can do that. But really, the offense, are you kidding me? KJ Jefferson comes in to run Gus Malzahn's Wildcat. I mean, for everybody listening, I saw Gus Malzahn's Wildcat for the first time in 2006 at Springdale High School. It was game-changing because then Felix Jones and Darren McFadden ran it at Arkansas. Then you saw Cam Newton win a national title at Auburn. Without being prompted and out being asked at Big 12 Media Days in Las Vegas, Gus said, KJ Jefferson is the closest thing to Cam that I've ever had. That should be scary. That should put everybody else on alert. Then you go and look at the transfer portal. Penny Boone is joining this backfield. I mean, you would agree this is the best back out of the MAC out of Toledo last year?
They're Harvey and Boone, their backfield is loaded.
Harvey's insane. 74 missed tackles, 26 explosive runs. So, I think the question is, can Kobe Hudson on the outside serve what Treylon Burks was for KJ in 2021? I don't want to talk about KJ 2022. He lost Treylon Burks. Offense changed a little bit. I don't want to talk about 2023 and freaking Dan Enos calling that offense for KJ. KJ has had a bum rap for 2 years. He gets here. He is thin, mean, motivated, the offensive style that he wants. And if Kobe Hudson can play that role on the outside, because the numbers are there from the slot and the wideout, that's his burner in this offense. Now, the offensive line gets 2 key additions. Continuity should be there in front of them for KJ, RJ Harvey, Penny Boone, whatever Gus is going to dial up for the 3 of them in the backfield.
And he'll be calling plays this year.
Yeah, find me a defensive line that is going to stop that trio. Let's just say that the offensive line does their job and neutralizes the trench. Find me a defensive line that's going to stop those 3 with the size of KJ Jefferson from running his most perfect playbook, which is the Wildcat. So you throw the spreadsheets out. And I think what has to happen, you're going to have to get a key win here at the very end of the season in the bounce house against Utah. You're going to need that bye week going into West Virginia because that's a brutal grind of a game. But you do get a stint of BYU, Arizona, and Arizona State leading up to that. So, and by the way, they get a bye before Colorado comes to town on September 28th. They're going to destroy Colorado's defensive line. I love UCF to contend. I think they get to the end of the Big 12 standings with a maximum 2 losses. I think they are a prime contender to win this conference. My issue is price. Because of my win total,
I
I make
can't
it,
get there on price.
I make it 6.3% to win the conference. That equates to 15-1. That number popped up in February. I thought to myself, you know what? It'd probably be bigger at other places, like maybe a 20-1. Never came out. I think I mentioned on another show somewhere in March that UCF was the sleeper. That number immediately disappeared. I'm going to throw it all out. UCF is my pick to win the Big 12. No defensive line is stopping this offense. Ted Roof can get some tackling, but he has defensive interior help here. And I love that scheduling angle of hosting Utah at the end of the season, which has so much implications that I can actually hedge out of this. So give me UCF to meet Iowa State as my exacta box for making the Big 12 championship.
Love it. Yeah, I can't get there on price, but I definitely can see the upside if these transfers on defense hit, because I do love the fit of Jefferson. But let's move on to another team that'll be counting on transfers, and that's Texas Tech. Over 7.5 plus 125, 15-1 to win the Big 12. They made the final list of the teams that I was considering as a future, along with Iowa State and UCF. Couldn't get there on price on UCF. Can with Iowa State. So here's my case for Texas Tech. Look, I've always been higher than the market on Baron Morton. And by the way, going back to the West Virginia under Texas, when West Virginia, who beat Texas Tech last year, Baron Morton had no arm in that game. If you go watch it, he literally could not throw the ball forward. He was so hurt. And Texas Tech hasn't had a quarterback stay healthy from the first game to the last game since Patrick Mahomes in 2016. Pretty wild stat. There's still questions about Morton's shoulder in the spring. They say he's fully healthy. I read an article today that said he's fully healthy. I'm like, oh my God, this again. He every week with the Texas Tech quarterback, it's already starting. But I'm very high on Morton. Brooks, their running back, is a stud. They did rebuild their offensive line. They rebuilt their wide receiver room. Heavy portal entries there, but I actually think they could be improved. Now, a lot of it's going to come down to continuity and how they gel, but I think from a talent perspective, they could be better. It's not like the wide receivers were great last year. It's not like the offensive line was great. They still have, over 120 starts that are returning, but I think that overall they could have more talent. And this is a team that's had good recruiting classes the past few years, and I like some of the portal hauls. On defense, it's a rebuilt defensive line. I like their linebackers, but they're going to miss Hutchinson Bradford on the defensive line. They lose 2 pros in the secondary. They're going to need some transfers to hit. But this is like, to me, because I'm so high on Morton when he is healthy, I think the market I'm higher than the market when it comes to him and his potential. And this is like, there's like this you're getting a little bit of a potential discount on Texas Tech. Now, I wish it was 20-1, not 15-1.
Right.
This is like the post-hype Texas Tech, right? Last year, they were everyone's pick to win, like sleeper pick to win the Big 12. And, they went 6-6 and then won their bowl.
Oh, the first 2 games really knocked that out, huh?
Yeah, that's what, so I want no part of their win total. Texas Tech every year loses a game. They'll lose to Wazoo, right?
Yeah.
Like, can't you see that? They'll lose like in overtime on a blocked field goal or something.
Yeah.
That's just what they do. But like, if they can figure it out and not like, I think that's like the swing game to their win total. But if they can figure that out and Morton stays healthy, like, there's a chance they're 5-0 heading to Arizona. They play Abilene, North Texas, Arizona State, Cincy at home. At Wazoo in week 2, then they go to Arizona. I think it's going to take a step back. Then they get Baylor at home. Then at TCU, at Iowa State, Colorado at home. I mean, they get 5 Big 12 home games. Could start really fast. They don't get the bottom 2, but they also don't get the top 2 in the conferences. They avoid Utah, Kansas State. They also avoid UCF and Kansas. So like, if Morton's healthy, the transfers hit. I wish the price was a little better, but that's my case for Texas Tech, which there's a lot of talent on this roster. You said you'd be shocked if they got there.
Yeah.
To the Big 12. Why are you lower than me on the Red Raiders?
Well, first off, from a pricing perspective, I give them a 4.9% chance that you're right, spot on. That should be plus 1950. They should be 20-1 or better if you're going to take a number. Also, pay attention to the market. Generally, teams like this, their numbers tend to float higher when the books don't get money. So if you like Texas Tech, I think you get a better number here mid-August. Anyways, I mean, there's a couple hidden things in that schedule. Four of the 9 teams they play in conference come off of a bye week, if you care about that. And three of them are in November: Iowa State, Colorado, and Oklahoma State. I wouldn't want to face any of those 3 teams in November off of a bye week. So they're
and they have 4 of 6 are on the road too in the middle, so that's not ideal. So they're going to pay for that easy start, right?
Yeah, they are. And so, you look at Morton, 11 big time throws, 15 turnover worthy plays. How much of that is health? How much is that, other issues that could be going on? Because we do like his arm. We always have since he was a true freshman. There are wide receiver options available. You were right. They cleaned out the offensive line, wide receiver units, complete roster wipe. But Fresno's Josh Kelly comes in, 5-star blue chip. Micah Hudson, supposed to be the best wide receiver in the history of Texas Tech, which is saying something considering what they've produced.
Yeah, he might start in the slot right off the bat.
I mean, if they can stay healthy and the offensive line can give Baron Morton a half a second, we got some cooking here. But this portal infused offensive line really bothers me when you look at the grades of the guys that they brought in. Now, Taj Brooks, 3.4 yards after contact, and created a crazy 96 missed tackles last year. But with this offensive line, he may need to create 200. So, he finished 4th nationally in elusiveness. And it's a huge advantage in week 1. Now, remember this against Wazoo. Texas Tech's new offensive line is Clay McGuire. He just came in from Wazoo. So I think that's a huge advantage in that game. But you're right, they can't mistake themselves out of that. One of the lowest TARP numbers in FBS on defense, 25% of tackles and PBUs come back. All the havoc producers from last year are gone. The defensive line does get to Braylon Carroll and safety Devin Cromwell, but we're talking just graded above replacement player. You're right. Easiest conference, 5 games, hidden aspect of that. I project them in the 6s, high 6s here. Even SP Plus projects them about 7.1. I'm under 7.5 on this team. I've got a little bit of money on it, got it in the app. And I don't like teams stuck with this constant health and offensive line issues. And I got a 25% TARP rating on defense. And this hidden aspect with the schedule. I mean, I wish you good luck, but man, I just, there's a lot here for me to look for from a red flag perspective.
I don't like the over for what it's worth. And I don't mind the under. It's like
UCF. It's like UCF. I hate the win total. I'll take the top.
Yeah. But I could make a case that if it all fits together and the transfers hit and Morton stays healthy, that there's definitely some upside with Texas Tech. But like I said, I wanted 20-1, and I think the best I can find out there is 15-1. Let's move on. All right, here we go. Let's move on to the 3rd team of the transfer reliance. And it's a polarizing one. Let's talk some Colorado Buffaloes. They are, I think, the best out there to win the Big 12 30-1. Over 5.5 juice to the over, minus 140-ish, I think, is close to consensus. Right off the bat, let me just ask you this. What do you project their wins at?
5.1.
I'm at 4.4. So yes, I like the under. Let's go through this team though. I would love to get an under 6. I don't know if I can even a juice 6.
It's moving that way. It's moving that way.
I'm waiting on you like Colorado under. Wait, because I mean right now it's like sometimes the NFL spread it's sitting at 2.5. It's about to go to 3 if you like the dog. Wait. And 6 is a key number in win totals.
It ain't getting to 7. Football. You are not getting to 7.
No, so I want to see if I can get 6. And there's just going to be that's one of the teams where recreational money can have an impact because everyone is betting it. Like the Heisman exposure, the national championship to make the college football playoff. It's all Colorado. But Colorado is talk about bringing guys in and guys leaving in the transfer portal. That's what this team is. They brought in 23 defensive transfers just to illustrate how much of this team is completely reliant on bringing guys in. They brought a ton of guys in last year. A lot of those guys left. They brought a ton more guys in. One area that I do like where they brought in is the defensive line. I like a lot of the guys they brought in there. So their defensive line should be better. However, depth is still an issue. I'm still not sold on the offensive line. Obviously, and I'm not a Shermer guy. Shador Sanders is super talented. Their receiving core is ridiculous. So they're going to put up points. They're going to make plays. Horn and Hunter are back, and then they add Wester and Shepard, who are really good. They have depth there. Really one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country, in my opinion. But the offensive line, still not up to par for me.
Right.
He up a school record 56 sacks last year and only averaged 2.3 yards per carry. It's basically everyone's gone. And they're starting over. New offensive line coach as well. Can they improve? Yes, because it can't be much worse than last year, but just how I'm grading them, I don't see a ton of upside, which I think is ultimately going to hold them back. And the defense, I do like the defensive line. They have some talent in the secondary, including Hunter, but the back end of this defense still isn't up to par for me. And I've talked about this before. You're not going to get any free games because of who Colorado is. And it's going to be another circus this year. And you're going to get everyone's best shot, including North Dakota State at Nebraska. Revenge for Nebraska. I'm sure they want that game. At Colorado State, rivalry game. They lost in overtime. I'm sure they want that game. That's your non-con. Are you positive Colorado's winning any of those games? Would you be shocked if they lost all three? No. There's really no gimmies on this schedule, which is one of the which is what
Deion's lead in was at Big 12. Can't we have a layup, please? Is what he said.
Face each of the top 6 in the league, one of the bottom 4. That's it. You get Cincy at home, but you also have Utah and Oklahoma State at home. You go to Kansas, you go to Arizona, to Texas Tech, to UCF. I don't see 6. If everything goes right, maybe they can get the 6 wins. They get some breaks. I don't see it. I show a lot of value on the under. I'm on the under here, but I'm going to wait to see if I can get a 6. And we talked the depth is still an issue. Well, look at that back half of the schedule. And, 2 of your home games are against Utah and Oklahoma State late in the year, at Texas Tech, at Kansas, sandwiched in between those games. So, yeah, if there's injuries, especially, if Sanders, God forbid, if he goes down, then it's all bets are off, or all bets are on with the under. So, yeah, I think there's too many holes on this team. Obviously, they're going to be exciting to watch because of the offense and what Sanders can do and those receivers, but I just don't think that the offensive line, the back end of the defense, is up to par. And then you have the depth issues and the schedule. Throw in that you're going to get everyone's best shot every week. I think that this is an underplay. What say you? I think they go because last year they went 4-8 last year, and people say, yeah, but they went 3-5 in one possession games. Not all one possession games are created equal. How many times was Colorado down 30 and they scored 3 touchdowns in the last 8 minutes, right? They had a ton of comebacks where they were out of it. They came back to cover. How many back doors did they get last year?
Shouldn't have beat Colorado State in double overtime.
Yeah, shouldn't have beat Colorado State. But and how many times did they make a game close that really wasn't close?
Yeah.
So not all one possession games are created equal. So I don't think that they were terribly unlucky that they went 4-8. I think that's probably where they end up again this year.
Yeah.
What say you?
In the words of Dave Matthews, so much to say. First off, RIP Sean Lewis and his Kent State offensive lineman that came in last year. Those guys are all gone. And Sean Lewis himself is at San Diego State. By the way, shameless promotion. Check out our Mountain West podcast. I got to chew Sean Lewis's ear off for an hour about how Colorado actually works in the coaching room. The offensive line is still undersized. Fresh portal crew comes in, but this is not a Big 12 sized offensive line. They're starting a true freshman at left tackle to protect Shador Sanders. What?
And they might still not have a run game. It's how many times can you just drop back and rely on that?
There's zero
time.
The run game was Dylan Edwards in the flats and let him try to make something happen. That was first and second down before, you had Shador trying to throw downfield. Now that's where the difference between Sean Lewis and Pat Shurmur is going to be. Besides tempo, expect a huge tempo decrease for Colorado's numbers. But Pat Shurmur said, what I'm doing in my offense is I'm getting rid of the pass route option, the route tree option for the wide receivers. They are going to run a strict route and not have the option to pick their own tree after the snap. So that should cut down on some post-snap mistakes that kind of happened, misreads between Shador and his wide receivers, which are unbelievable. Besides Travis Hunter, they're going to go and they're going to get LeJontay Wester, 2.7 yards per route run at FAU last year for Tom Herman. Amazing. So we'll see how the offense does. To me, it's the same thing. First and second down, we're going to pass in the flats. We're going to try to pass short. We're going to try to get something out of the backfield. Then we're going deep ball. And make no mistake, Shador Sanders, if he was on, say, Ohio State, he should be at the top of the board for the Heisman. He is that good. But you don't have an offensive line that's going to protect you. And that's all Deion Sanders could ever talk about, was throwing his offensive line under the bus, protect my son. I need some protection. I mean, Bielema once made a comment like this about his offensive line, but it wasn't this bad. So when you look at the defense, and this is what brings me to that game Colorado goes to Kansas late in the year. It's like, I think that's more of a trip for them to play in an NFL stadium than it is for them to actually play Kansas. When asked about Robert Livingston coming in, he was a secondary coach for the Bengals. He's been in the Bengals system forever. It was Livingston's NFL background and preparing these kids for the next level. And I just kind of sat back after Deion said that, and I thought, besides Shador, besides Travis Hunter, and besides maybe Shiloh and Wester, who the hell on this squad is going to the NFL? Like, you brought a defensive coordinator in to get them ready for the NFL. So it just seems like the focus is not where it should be, like winning the Big 12, winning the national title. But Travis Hunter is going to be the all-important floating nickel in the heavy Tampa 2. Preston Hodge, I mean, this is what I expect Robert Livingston to bring what the Bengals have in. So that's going to put Travis Hunter in the all-important spot of the nickel. Preston Hodge comes from Liberty. He was used in single coverage on the slot, on the outside. That's a good defensive piece. And then we just talked about how UCF already had defensive interior help. Well, Colorado won the sweepstakes on the portal. BJ Green comes in from Arizona State. Ray Buell comes in from Ohio. Those are two of the big defensive interior players that people wanted in the portal. So I think my whole thing, Stuck, is Colorado got better in the starting depth chart with the starters. They did absolutely nothing to build depth on the offensive line and the trench on defense. They did nothing to build depth anywhere on this field, on this roster. You look at their 5 Big 12 games on the road, Folsom Field, Kansas State, Utah, Oklahoma State, some of these games, are in November. Colorado's going to go to shitty weather, grinding against Kansas, grinding against Oklahoma State. That bad weather in Boulder is good for Oklahoma State to end the season. So major talent upgrade, zero depth, a trip to the bounce house on September 28th with UCF off a bye week. It all piles into a win total of 5.1. I will say this. Shout out to the guys at South Point. Deion got up there on stage, started talking about North Dakota State and saying, I need a layup. I need a layup. Made further comments about how this game is going to be really tough for them. That number in the market was taking a big dip and getting a lot of Bison money until there was extreme buyback about 2 weeks before Big 12 Media Days. After Deion said that, and that's floating around, that number is going to dip even farther. I think Colorado is going to be just fine in game one. Yeah, I'm not going to get into North Dakota State. I think they're going to be fine. I think that's a number at about 6. If we want to wait to 3.5 or 4, maybe fire in week 1. I love the game of the year against Nebraska. I project Colorado to be +2 in that game. It's 6.5 in the market. I think that game is just 2 teams punching each other in the face in a 1-possession game. So give me 6.5 points. But once we get past that, Jay Norvell is going to throw with Torrey Horton all over this defense and the middle portion specifically out of the slot. I'm not confident they can win that game. So I'm at 5.1. Under 5.5 plus 115 is what is in the market right now. But that number, like Stuck said, it is going in the direction favoring Colorado. Wait for the 6. Circle your calendar, August 20th-ish. There should be some 6s out there, but under all the way here. By the way, Stuck, they don't have team motivations like everybody else. It's about preparing for the next level.
Yeah. I completely agree with you on the under. All right, let's move on to our next group of teams. Two teams in the state of Texas. I'm going to call the potential rebounders, and that is TCU and Baylor. These are two teams that in recent seasons, Baylor 3 years ago, TCU 2 years ago, who had one of their most successful seasons in program history. Baylor fell off a cliff last year. Went 3-9. One of those wins was an absolute miracle against UCF, and TCU finished 5-7 after making the national championship. The first team to do so since Texas, I believe, back in 2010. TCU, for what it's worth, 16-1. You could find a 20-1 out on TCU to win the Big 12. Baylor, you could find a 65-1. Baylor over 5.5 even money. TCU over 7.5 plus 120. Which one of these teams do you think is more likely to rebound, or are you bearish on both?
Bearish on both, but TCU definitely has a much more rope to get away than Dave Aranda does. Dave Aranda's in trouble. Which one do you want to start off with?
Yeah, we can start. We'll start with Baylor. I mean, look, there's some desperation. It smells like desperation.
Yep.
In Waco, and he's going to be calling the plays on defense. He brings in your boy Jake Spavital to run the bear raid. It's going to be a big change schematically on offense.
Yep.
My question is, look, I know the MAC as well as anybody. Daquan Finn can't run this offense. I'm sorry, I don't see it. I mean, Sawyer Robinson, the backup, he knows the air raid. Maybe he's the better option.
They haven't named a starter.
They haven't named a starter, but that's something interesting to watch. But I would assume they want it to be Finn, which is why they brought him in. But I don't think that he has the accuracy to run this offense. And you just look at this Baylor team. And look up and down the roster. Like, what are you excited about? Not much to me. What are your thoughts on the Bears?
It does feel like a couple of desperation moves here. I'll go really high level. Jake Spavital is bringing in a completely different offense than Jeff Grimes. So you can expect to see a massive tempo change. Is that good for this offense and the mistakes that they can make and the pieces that they have? So, when you look at it, they're going to go from 27 to 24 seconds per play. So you expect totals to increase there. The wide receiver room has Monterey Baldwin in the slot, 71 targets, over 2 yards per route run, which was our line for explosiveness. But you're right about Daquan Finn, who has not been named the starter. 46 career big time throws, 45 turnover worthy plays. Sure, 25 touchdowns on the ground, 15 fumbles lost. Baylor was 106th in sacks allowed last year, and they did nothing on the offensive line to try and protect Finn, who could win a game for you and lose a whole bunch for you. Now, on the other side, Powledge was running a 3-3-5 last year. Very vanilla. Not a lot going on, not a lot of blitz, not a lot of, anything crazy. But Aranda is going to go and call the plays. Like, maybe nobody else is thinking of this except for me. Last time Aranda called plays was 2019, and all you and I could talk about was how poorly that LSU team was tackling. Grant Delpit missed like 20 tackles in one game. And, somewhere around midseason, Aranda had to readjust. He was running 7 different personnels, 2-4-5, 1-4-6, 3-2. I mean, everything in the book. Complex blitz scheme. That's what he ran in his playbook, not a vanilla 3-3-5. So my question is, with a defense that is extremely poor on tackling, you did nothing to address that, and you're going to put a complex defensive playbook with blitz packages in there? The defensive line's been backfilled from the portal, but none of these were Siaka Ika in the interior. You go to the conference schedule. I mean, Utah's a non-con. They're going to be favored over Tarleton and Air Force, but the Big 12 schedule is tough. Double-digit underdogs: West Virginia, Iowa State, Oklahoma State. No thanks. Under 3.5 Big 12 wins for me. I project them at 2.7 Big 12 wins. Overall, I make them 4.5, which you could take the under on their overall win total. I'm just not going to mess around with Tarleton. So anyways, long story. Yeah, these are desperation reaches. You went and got an offensive coordinator that doesn't match the personnel you have after Grimes played a rushing punch you in the face. And your defense, I don't know what this is. And Daquan Finn is not the answer at quarterback. Under, please.
Yeah, it feels like the end of the line for old desperate Dave. We get big changes You're going to get a more aggressive D. Offense, you're going to have massive change. You're going from wide zone to inside zone. You're going way more pace. You're going to air raid. They were super young last year. They bring back their old secondary, but their pass D was so bad. Like they went 1-7 at home. So maybe it's good they only have 4 Big 12 home games. They do face only 2 of the top 6 in the Big 12 since Utah is a non-conference game and both of them are at home. Maybe that's not a good thing. With some of their more winnable teams they play on the road.
I think one thing,
no part of buying Baylor.
Let me say this: like, if you're going to be spavital and run the air raid and try to get into team secondaries, the games that you could win have really strong secondaries. TCU, Colorado, and Kansas. That's their strength.
Yep. All right, but speaking of TCU, the Horned Frogs 20-1. You can find out there over 7.5 plus 120. You know, I did consider them as a potential future. I just don't know if they have the quarterback play. I assume it's going to be Hoover, who showed some flashes at quarterback. Ken Seals from Vanderbilt is apparently in the mix there.
Hoover didn't play in the spring. We don't know if
yeah.
Hoover's healthy.
Yeah, that's definitely a big key. Their offensive line, I'm also really worried about. I mean, basically what this team comes down to, similar to Baylor, they want to be more aggressive on defense. So does TCU. They brought in Andy Avalos. They're going to move away from the 3-3-5 to a 4-2-5. Try to get after the quarterback more, something they couldn't do last year. Try to generate more pressure. But quarterback's in flux. The offensive line is definitely in flux. So can the transfers come together on the offensive line? They did go 0-4 in one-possession games last year, so it's maybe a chance for some positive regression. They have talent on this team. It's not like Baylor. Like, I can look at TCU, and there's some talented pieces that you can get excited about. Like, you know, they did bring plenty of power forward transfers in to help on the offensive line. And, you know, there's definitely some talent at the skill positions. If you look at the schedule, 4 Big 12 home games only. They get Oak State and Arizona at home. They do go to Utah. They avoid Iowa State, Kansas State. You know, they have two ACC teams on the road in non-conference play, plus Long Island, which is a little bit odd. But overall, in the Big 12, they get 6 of the top 8 and only 1 of the bottom 3. Plus, you know, 2 of the teams that you would say are the more winnable games on their schedule, Cincy and Baylor. Both those games are on the road. So I don't love the schedule. Don't love the quarterback offensive line combination, even though there are some signs here. If the defensive scheme change works to generate more pressure, there are some signs for some potential positive regression and, you know, kind of buying the dip after last year's disappointing season. But I couldn't quite get there on a future. What are your thoughts on TCU?
Yeah, I had problems with Hoover last year because I was always doing a check on what kind of coverage he was going to face. He excelled, I believe, against cover 1, and then cover 2, 3 and quarters. He was horrific. We'll see if he gets any better with that. Offensively, not a lot of changes here with Kendall Browse going on. There's 61% on both sides of the ball as far as TARP. So that means that they're right at FBS level. But I think the news for me is really all on the defense. Now, the timing of this is just baffling to me. So the hiring, Joe Gillespie gets fired at the end of last year, which 2 years ago, Sonny Dykes remarked, I have the best defensive coordinator in the nation before they went to the national title game. He has a bad season. He gets fired. I think I know he's now coaching at a Texas high school, but Andy Avalos comes in with his 4-2-5. It wasn't great at Boise. It wasn't great at Oregon. There were multiple issues with Andy Avalos's work at those prior stops. I mean, hell, he was just fired from Boise State for a reason because of that defense. They were outside the top 100 and tackling and finishing drives. I still don't know how Spencer Danielson got promoted. But anyways, Andy Avalos is here. He's going to bring a 4-man front instead of the 3-3-5 that TCU has always run. They make that decision. And then what happens? Demonic Williams, their star nose tackle, hits the portal, chooses a OU, goes to Oklahoma. So you decided to go from a 3 to a 4-man front, and then your best player on the defensive line hits the portal and leaves. Houston nose tackle Hakeem Agiolaya, he's going to come in, be the most important piece on the inside, the defensive interior. Again, the secondary is going to play a lot of cover 1 like they usually do in this 4-2-5, but you know, they were 121st in creating havoc last year. and there's not a lot of havoc makers on this defense. Now, there's 5 Big 12 home games here. They do go to Utah, and they do go to Arrowhead to face Kansas. I think the SMU game is ripe for them to get whooped. I mean, ran out of the building up in Dallas. And the reason is because TCU's got to play UCF the week before, and then they're going to get Kansas the week after. So it's a big Big 12 sandwich spot where Sonny Dykes has already beaten SMU twice since he left there. He's got his revenge. Well, now it's SMU's turn, and guess what? SMU's off a bye when they host TCU. I've been looking for a game of the year number on that, but I haven't been able to find it. If it pops, we're all in on SMU that week. The trench is just populated with new names. The defensive coordinator that struggled in multiple spots, tougher schedule than you think. Forget it. I am well below what their win total is. So give me under 7.5. I know it's juiced at 140, but I would take an alternate under 6.5 or under 7. So that's how much I don't like them.
All right, now let's close things up. We'll do rapid fire for the final 4 teams. The basement dwellers, teams that I think you would agree, have no chance to win this conference. I think you could throw Baylor in there too. But Cincy, Arizona State, BYU, and Houston. Cincy is the best you can find out there is 80-1. Arizona State 125-1. BYU 150-1. Houston 150-1. Houston. Let's start with Houston. Over 3.5 minus 150 is one of the numbers out there. Willie Fritz comes in. I don't think that this roster is ready to really make noise to where in the state where Dana left them. I think they probably end up 3-9, 4-8. They went 4-8 last year. But it's a vicious schedule. Only 4 Big 12 home games. I have it as one of the 5 hardest schedules in the country. I mean, they start off at home against UNLV. That number is coming down. They're a 2.5 point favorite. You don't win that game, then you go to Oklahoma. You play Rice. It was a wild game last year. Then you're at Cincy. You know, all these games that these teams that you should beat, they're on the road, like at Cincy, at TCU.
Yep.
Because you play Utah, Kansas State at home. Like, where are the wins here? Hard for me to find them. Would lean under with Houston. Too many questions. It'll take Fritz a little bit of time. I don't think it's a year 1 bump. Any quick thoughts on Houston?
Yeah, Willie Fritz has improved every team that he's been at. He had Sam Houston go from like a 1-win team to the FCS championship. Georgia Southern improved. Tulane improved. He has never made a team worse in the first year. So that he does have that going for him. Massive steam on 4.5 down to 3.5 in the market now. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a 3 here in mid-August coming up where we could do a little bit of damage, because I do like Donovan Smith. I think he's perfect for the run concepts that Fritz has. He's already got 600 rushing yards last year, scramble designed. It's an offense that really was kind of made for him. Tank Jenkins got a waiver.
And he's so high
guard.
variance, so he can pull off games. When he gets hot, when he gets red hot in a game, he is so hot and so pinpoint. And then he'll have games where he's just off, but he can definitely pull off an upset or two.
He fits the system that Michael Pratt's been running the last couple of years. So you look at Tank Jenkins, he got a 7th-year waiver. He has 2,000 snaps at right guard. So there's a little bit of, move. They're going to be able to move the trench a little bit on some teams. Now, Sheil Wood, who's a defensive coordinator, is going to be a head coach here, like maybe next year. Like, he is the hot name coming up in the market. Previously with Troy, last year with Tulane, top 25 in rushing defense from a success rate perspective the last couple of years at both stops. So I like it from that point long term. I don't think Willie's going to get him any lower than 3 wins, but you're right. Where do they win? Like, where do they win these games? Houston's going to be favored over UNLV, Rice, and Baylor. Sad thing is I love UNLV and Rice this year. They're in coin flip games against Cincinnati and BYU. And KU and Arizona are favorites. They don't have the front 7D for Donovan Smith and the Fritz triple in space. So it's like you said, they're going to show up against Arizona, Kansas, UNLV, Rice, or Baylor, and Donovan Smith is going to ball out and take over a game. I think over 3.5 is the play, but because the market's going the other way, at 3, it's gone way too far. But there are a lot of, I don't know, I hate to call them out, right? There's touts, there's others, people that aren't us. They are banging on this under. And I'm telling you, at 3.5, it's gone pretty far. At 3, it is way too far. So I say sit back for a few weeks, and if you want a piece, over 3 is the number I would definitely buy.
All right, let's move on to BYU. Over 4.5. plus 110 is the best you can find out there. I just don't think that they're ready. Their roster is ready for Power 4 football from a depth perspective. Don't think that I don't see it here with BYU.
Yep.
What say you?
Yeah, project 3.8 here. TJ Wood joins as the offensive line coach from Georgia Southern. He's got to improve BYU's time. And the trench has been such an issue stuck for years now. And they only have 88 starts returning on the offensive line. And, Gary Bohannon's back in the Big 12. McKay Hillstead's here. Jake Retzlaff is here. They're going to compete for quarterback. Not a lot. Now, Jay Hill coming in from Weber. That was a really good move to go get him. The 3.35 improved modestly, but they're still outside the top 50 in defensive finishing drives. They're outside the top 80 and defensive quality drives, which means teams are still getting into scoring position. Havoc is the focus this year. They're not ready from the trenches. Now, Tyler Batty, edge.
Yeah, they were dead last in the country in sacks and also couldn't defend the run. Not a great combo.
They're not ready. Under 4.5, I project 3.8.
Yeah, I'm at 3.9, so I would agree with you there. Arizona State over 4.5 plus 142. I will say in defense of BYU and Arizona State, both those teams had a horrible injury luck last year. Arizona State in the offensive line, quarterback position. They were also 1-3 in one possession games. This is Dillingham year 2. New offensive coordinator comes in. Brutal league draw. I mean, they have a really tough schedule and only 4 Pac-12 home games, more travel, ton of transfers on defense. Could have, I think, 11 transfers on their 2 deep on defense. I project with Arizona State 4-6. Where are you at?
I'm in the 2s.
2s.
I'm in the 2s. I mean, look, there's a lot going on here. Like Rashada leaves, wide receiver Elijah Badger goes to Florida. Sam Levitt and Jeff Sims, our own Jeff Sims turnover machine from Nebraska and Georgia Tech, are going to compete at quarterback. And who's my offensive coordinator here stuck? Marcus Arroyo, who was horrific at UNLV and refused to let Justin Herbert pass in first and second down when he was the offensive coordinator at Oregon. I do not believe in his outdated system. I don't care who wins quarterback because it is a bad system. You're going to end up running the Cam Skatebo Wildcat like there was last year. He prefers outside zone. They don't have the offensive line to even run that. Limited experience at both guard and tackle positions. I don't even know where the bottom 5 ranks and quality drive. I mean, they're Utah and Kansas State. They start off with them early in the season. Both Utah and Kansas State are coming off of a bye. I mean, how mean are these schedule makers against Arizona State? They're going to be favored just once. That comes against Wyoming. Have you seen Wyoming's quarterback? Evan Svoboda? He's wearing Josh Allen's number, and he's going to take advantage of this Arizona State defensive line too. I think the number's right against Wyoming, but this is not a Wyoming team that is reeling from the loss of Craig Bull at head coach. So under 4.5, I take under 4. I take under 3.5. I don't care where it goes.
Yeah, No, I'm sorry. I'm at 3-6.
You said 4. Woo.
4-6 is what I'm at for Cincy.
Okay.
I'm at 3-6. Sorry. Hold on. Yeah, I guess I would lean under, but I'm definitely not as low on Arizona State as you, but that schedule and just the roster overall might be a rough year.
You're going to show up on the podcast and tell me you're going to back Marcus Arroyo, right? You're going to do that one week?
Probably 1 week.
Trash segment coming.
Yeah. Cincy over 5.5 even money. I thought I was going to like this over.
Yeah.
They were horrible in one possession games, but the losing Briggs and now probably Corleone on the defensive line. I'm not wowed by their linebacker group. They lost a lot in the secondary, not wowed by who they brought in. The offense, like, who's the quarterback? Are they going to throw the ball? Like, the run game's going to be solid. They bring back all 5 offensive linemen, but after digging into this team, I've downgraded them a bit from where I initially had them. Why I thought I was going to like them, they were unlucky in one possession games. I just don't know if they have the roster, the depth, and they're really ready yet. But on the surface, it's like they could start 4-0. Like they have Towson, Pitt at home, at Miami of Ohio, revenge
Yep.
there. They lost on like a block field goal. Then Houston at home. Like you're like, oh, you start 4-0. Your win total's 5.5 even money. Then from there, it's like at Texas Tech, at UCF. You get Arizona State at home too. We just talked about them. So like, you can talk yourself into them being 5-2.
Mhm.
And then you go to Colorado. You got West Virginia at home, at Iowa State, at Kansas State, and TCU at home. So like, there's winnable games here, for sure. I'm not one of the reasons why I'm not playing this under, but my numbers after adjusting, just don't really love this team. How about you?
I make it directly on 5.5, which is where the market is, but I make a conference win total at 3.3. I do like the higher defensive coordinator Tyson Veld is going to come from Iowa State. He was the linebacker coach there. He will implement the 3-3-5 stack. I'm not sure that's going to catch on so fast, but I think that's a great addition. Really, the announcement of Dante Corleone, the godfather of this team, he's been there forever since the pandemic. First team all Big 12, blood clots. Not sure when he's going to come back. Now, we've had this in college football before, and all of a sudden the players show up. So, he could come back right after we get done completing this podcast, but that's the biggest thing on defense that you need to pay attention to. I mean, the offense has Tyron Smith. We loved him at UTEP, one of the most explosives in the G5. Xavier Henderson's there. He had 98 targets and he averaged 2 yards per route run. But is Brendan Sorsby from Indiana going to get it there? I mean, he had a 15-5 big time throw to turnover worthy play ratio at Indiana, but we'll see. And Kiner had 26 rushes that went over 10 yards and created 53 missed tackles. There's goodness here, but how many times did you and I bet them on the spread last year and they mistaked themselves out of our covers? It just week after week after week. So for me, I make the schedule. I make the conference win 3.3. The number out there is 2.5. And you say, where are they going to get their wins? It's a great situational spot against UCF. They're going to come out of a hangover from Florida. Since he's going to be favored by a TD or more in 3 games, Towson, Arizona State, Pitt. Now, Arizona State only matters for the conference. Now, when you look at that after Houston, Arizona State at home, they need a win against Colorado, Texas Tech, TCU. I wouldn't blame somebody if they took an over 5.5 and then used games towards the end of the season like West Virginia and TCU in the November portion to hedge out of their win total. It's a schedule that you have 3 of the last 5 games. You're going to be able to hedge out of a win total, whether you go over or under. But I love the conference win total over 2.5. They can easily get there.
Yeah, this is a team I admitted I need to dig more into. I mean, I probably penalized them too much after digging over the past week. I'm not going to get there on an over, but and I admittedly I don't think I'm going to play this under. But I mean, look, this defense. Look how much of a step back they've taken over the past couple of years with everything that they've lost in the secondary, now defensive line. It's just not the same scary unit.
Especially that Corleone.
Yeah, and that's a big loss. And the quarterback, I'm not sold on Sorsby. I mean, there's a couple other guys that are maybe in the mix. I assume it's going to be Sorsby. And yeah, I mean, the running game should be solid. The offensive line returns, like everyone returns, the guards are pretty good, but it's not like this great offensive line. So yeah, I just think that the guys that they've replaced other guys with over the past, the talent level that they've replaced some of the losses on defense, it's a big drop off for Cincy, but it's definitely a team I'm struggling to price. They were definitely unlucky last year, but they also just like consistently melted down in second half. I think that maybe speaks to some of the depth issues that they're having. And I'm not a big Satterfield guy either, you know that.
Right. Let me say this. I saw Satterfield have lunch by himself in Vegas in Allegiant at a table in the middle of the media. Nobody bothering him, nobody talking to him. When these coaches come together at these media days, it's like a big powwow, knuckles, golf rounds, wives. Satterfield is not liked among his peers whatsoever. Does that play a factor in them covering these spreads? Because I feel like we had at least 4 bets on Cincy in the middle of the year last year, and something happened in the second half where we lost against the spread. And if there is a true, I don't like Scott Satterfield in a head coach's head, I'd have a problem backing them week to week.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we did this because I definitely need to dig in a little further on Cincy. But let's wrap things up. We got through all 16 teams.
Whew.
I think just a consensus future, Iowa State. What could go wrong? At least it's not like a make the college football playoff or a national title future like I did one in 3 or 4 years ago. We both like Iowa State better than 10-1. You can find an 11-1 out there. And I'll say unders, Colorado, West Virginia, Arizona are my 3 favorite. You agree on Iowa State as a future? Anything else you want to add?
I definitely think UCF joins them in the championship game. Absolutely one of my most fun favorite futures to watch, but pricing perspective, it's not good. So determine there how much you think this team can beat the Excel sheet and the mathematics. Unders, listen, the bad teams are going to go under. Baylor's going to go under. I think Aranda will be fired before Pittman. We'll get to that SEC preview. I think Baylor's in trouble. Arizona State's in trouble. I don't like what TCU has on offense, and they're going to a 4-man front and can't do it. I like the under there too. But when you look at the teams that I love, I do like West Virginia game of the year against Pitt. Really bad mismatch. We'll talk about that on the ACC podcast. Kansas State loves to run Kansas out of the building. There's no way Kansas defense is going to be able to stop that. And Colorado, back them early, fade them late whenever that depth and the roster starts to be a problem. That's really best summary of Big 12 that I can come up with.
It should be a wild year. A lot of these teams are close. I think we both agree. Top Utah, Kansas State, probably not much value. Bottom of this league doesn't really have a chance. If you really like one of these teams in kind of that 3 to 4 to 8 to 9 range, it's a good, fun league to take a shot on for a future this year. Should be wild. Come down to just a lot of variance and injury luck. But it's good to be back, shaking the cobwebs off. We will have plenty more episodes coming out. Let me pull up the I think I mentioned the schedule earlier in the episode, but Colin, it's good to be back. We have next we'll be recording ACC plus Notre Dame, and the grind has already begun. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for watching on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe if you're listening at home. It really helps us out. Now subscribe to the podcast, not YouTube. Stay subscribed there. Leave a 5-star review. I'll do a bunch of giveaways on the podcast. Those really, really help us out this time of year. Appreciate everyone listening. It's good to be back. Looking forward to a very profitable year. We'll catch y'all later. Cheers.
Peace out.